Hey there, Shat fam. I know you're all excited to hear our long-awaited Reservoir Dogs episode, and it's a good one. But before you do, I'd like you to mark down two important dates on your calendars, September 28th and October 9th. That's when we'll be live streaming special events as a thank you to our listeners and our commissioners. On September 28th at 9 p.m. Eastern, you can catch our live review of Uncle Buck, which will be a fundraiser for the Highland Park community in the wake of the July 4th shootings that occurred there. All donations from that live stream will benefit the July 4th Highland Park Shooting Response Fund, and that's in the name of our longtime commissioners, Adam, Josh, and John R. These are the brothers who paid for The Crow, Forrest Gump, Bad Boys, Silence of the Lambs, and lots more Shat reviews. We stand with you guys and my former home of Chicagoland. And at 10 p.m. Eastern, October 9th, we'll be live streaming our review of Rambo First Blood. If you tune into that Twitch stream, you can help crowdfund Shat the Movie's special request, Suburban Commando. Yes, that's Suburban Commando, for legendary listener Tom in Crane, Texas. If we hit $150 in donations during that pod, Tom will get his wish, and we will see Hulk Hogan starring in Suburban Commando for the pod. As always, both streams will be live on Twitch at shatpod.com/Twitch and available for viewing later on our YouTube channel if you just don't do Twitch or you can't make it at those times. They're completely free to watch and comment, so we hope you'll join us. Thanks for listening, and as Joe Cabot would say, let's go to work.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Shat the Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, then this is the podcast for you. I am one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my co-hosts, Ash Lady E. Neuendijk.
Hi, y'all.
And Big D. Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And each week we take a look back in time to decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you'd like to see all the movies we have covered, will cover, want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatpod.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie would take to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. That's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV. We review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, True Detective, Lovecraft Country, and Watchmen. Find all that information and past episodes at shatpod.com/TV. And finally, to hang out with us live, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatpod.com/Twitch, where we play video games, host watch parties, and edit this podcast live. All that being said, Big D, what movie are you reviewing tonight?
Jane, I'm very excited. Our commissioner from last week and multiple commissioner and big-time supporter Shat the Movies, he came back with a good one for us. And he hit us up and he said, would you guys please review the 1992 crime film written and directed by Quentin Tarantino in his film debut, the one and only Reservoir Dogs?
Well, and our commissioner wrote in and said, Reservoir Dogs was the third Quentin Tarantino movie I watched, Pulp Fiction and Four Rooms being the first two. My expectations were high, and it did not disappoint. Watching this movie is just me laughing, saying, ooh, and that's fucking awesome. Great ensemble cast. Tarantino dies early, so you don't need a bunch of him acting. The coolest ice characters, the interactions, the dialogue, the off-screen action, the dark humor, the bleak ending. There isn't much I don't like about this movie. My friends and I quoted it constantly. Here's the news. It looks like Sam's hot car lot out there. How many dicks is that? A lot. The commode story, etc. There are a couple of homophobic scenes with Nice Guy Eddie and Vic and the slur Joe calls Mr. Pink. I chalked that up to this movie being about a bunch of asshole murdering criminals, but our 2022 ears can't help but make it stick out. I give this movie 0.25 wipes. Thank you, Jody G.
Well, Jody, last week I felt very guilty about slandering your commission, defending your life. And I hope this week we can make it up to you because I think all three of us are big fans of Reservoir Dogs and we're super excited to do this movie. Well, Reservoir Dogs is a 1992 crime film written and directed by Quentin Tarantino in his feature-length debut. It stars Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Tierney, Michael Madsen, and Edward Bunker as thieves whose heist goes terribly wrong. The film depicts the events before and after, but not during, the heist. Kirk Baltz, Randy Brooks, and Stephen Wright also play supporting roles. It incorporates many motifs that have become Tarantino's hallmarks: violent crime, pop culture references, profanity, and nonlinear storytelling. The film is regarded as a classic of independent film and a cult film, and was named greatest independent film of all time by Empire. Although controversial at first for its depictions of violence and heavy use of profanity, Reservoir Dogs was generally well received, and the cast was praised by many critics. So Big D, Ash, we always ask where you were and what your memories are of the movie we're covering. Tonight is Reservoir Dogs. Ash, we'll start with you.
My love for Quentin Tarantino really has no bounds. I adore almost all of his movies. I have loved him since the very first frame of Pulp Fiction. When I watched that movie in the first 5 minutes, I knew I was watching something so different than anything I had ever seen before, and I fell in love with it. And I didn't see this one, kind of like Jody, until a few years later. I was in high school by the time I saw this one. And like with Pulp Fiction, I immediately fell in love with this one too. I have so many memories of watching this movie over and over and over again, just wasted in college, post-college. And I was really excited to get to review this one for the pod.
Ash, like you and like I think most people, I discovered Quentin Tarantino through Pulp Fiction, which was released 2 years after Reservoir Dogs. And after watching Pulp Fiction at least a dozen times in theaters, I was desperate to get my hands on a copy of this legendary film called Reservoir Dogs. But it took several years. I couldn't find one until my senior year of high school, which came in really handy because I watched it over and over again, only to find a year later, as we mentioned earlier in the pod, this was a giant of independent film. And so this was actually the primary film we had to study for independent film class in college. And I was just a step ahead of the game.
So let's make it 3 for 3. I did not watch this until I saw Pulp Fiction. I can remember exactly where I was for that, but Reservoir Dogs, I don't know. But when the movie starts, and with Pulp Fiction, it starts, you know you're seeing something different. Tarantino wasn't making the typical film that I was used to, and I quickly became a fan of his movies. But Tarantino, the guy, I've grown to seriously dislike him. He was on Stern a couple years back when I had Sirius. He was talking about Roman Polanski having sex with a 13-year-old girl. He was 43 at the time, and Quentin went above and beyond to protect Polanski, saying that the girl was down for it. She wanted to take Quaaludes and get drunk. I think the dude's obviously a pervert. He's an egotistical narcissist with a well-documented foot fetish, but he's a great director. He's a great student of film, and I think he gets a pass for a lot of stuff. But I'm going to push that aside and just review the movie today and not the man.
I mean, the Stern interview was in 2003, and he has since come out and gone on an apology tour about all of that and said, you know, that obviously this woman was clearly raped and stuff. So, I mean, I don't know if he's a pervert because of that. I mean, that was a long fucking time
I'm
ago.
talking about the foot fetish. I'm talking about every movie, and that there's just go back and watch Dusk Till Dawn, that foot scene that he has where he's fantasizing. He's a weird dude. Okay, maybe foot fetish. He's a strange guy, but I just think he's a bit of a pompous asshole.
As a dude who's grossed out by feet, I feel like a foot fetish is not a bad thing for people to have. It's fine. It's fucking gross, but it's fine. I'll still come watch your movies, foot fetishists of the world. Let's hit the trailer.
Here are your names. Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Pink.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
Who cares what your name is?
Yeah, that's if the manager won't give you the diamonds.
Cut off one of his fingers. The little one.
I feel scared in case I fall off the chair. And I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs.
If they hadn't done what I told them not to do, they'd still be alive.
It's so hard to keep the smile from my face. I'm all over the place.
You're acting like a first-year fucking thief. I'm acting like a professional.
And your family all but running. Slap you on the back and say,
Choice we've been doing 10 years. They can have some stupid motherfucker. Ain't no choice at all. Bam. Bam. Bam, 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 bam.
you're under arrest, sugar.
Harvey Keitel, Michael Madsen,
Chris Penn, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Tierney, and Tim Roth. They're the Reservoir Dogs.
Hey, Joe, want me to shoot this guy?
Eight gangsters eat breakfast at a Los Angeles diner. All but boss Joe Cabot and his son, the underboss, nice guy Eddie Cabot, use aliases. There's Mr. Brown, Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, Mr. Blue, Mr. Orange, and Mr. Pink. After Mr. Brown finishes rambling about the Madonna song, Like a Virgin, the group argues about Pink's policy of not tipping. So Reservoir Dogs opens with the gangsters sitting around the table. They're debating the meaning of Madonna's Like a Virgin. They're not talking about the heist. They're not talking about their past. They're not giving us anything to fill in the facts of this movie. They're talking about Madonna and dicks and Toby Chu and whether people should automatically tip. This was so different. And I cannot stress this enough. So different from other 1992 movies. It's entertaining. It's slick. It is so Tarantino. And like Ash said about Pulp Fiction, I was immediately hooked in the first minute.
Yeah, I think that this is what critics of Kevin Smith and his type of dialogue, this is what they use to justify their opinions, because Clerks came out in 94, so it's 2 years after this, and Clerks feels elitist, and rightfully so. Despite my love of Clerks, it does. It feels elitist. Whereas this feels fresh. It feels like conversations that actually happen between really interesting and really intelligent people, but it isn't alienating in the way that Clerks can be for some people who watch it. And it's just so good. And when we get into that tipping conversation that just seamlessly kind of just transitions the way real conversations do, and then you've got Steve Buscemi, such a young Steve Buscemi. I'm always shocked at how young he is in this film. And you get him and they all tell him about how, women, this is the only job that they can be guaranteed to get, and they make their living off the tips. And he just kind of looks at him and he goes, meh. Fuck all that. Like, it's so funny with the way that he sets this up, and the dialogue from the get-go just like completely hooks you. You don't need a plot. You don't need a heist. You only need these people sitting around a diner table.
Well, you said it's a real conversation. The way they deliver it, it's how people talk. Everyone's talking at the same time. There's multiple conversations going on, and the camera is following around the outside of the group. Half the time, it's shooting someone who's not even talking. So you're observing the members of this team, this crew that's coming together, but you're hearing the side conversations. It's flowing natural in the way that Clerks never could. This is the way that groups communicate. And I just love the way that each person is just having their own conversation. They're not waiting their turn to speak while everybody else is sitting around patiently. That's just not real.
Yeah. And then Quentin Tarantino does this thing that he does in his movies, which is right where you think you know what you're watching. He completely flips it on its head because of the way that he tells stories, the way that they are like puzzle pieces told out of order. Because you've got the amazing scene in the diner, these people, they're walking like badasses in these credits in their nice little suits with their skinny black ties. And then all of a sudden, there's this scene in the car. And the tonality switches completely on a dime. And it is such a bloody, gory scene. And the way the blood is all over those seats that are white, the white of his shirt that throughout the scene gets redder and redder and redder as it travels up the shirt toward his neck, the way that the blood is all over Harvey Keitel's arm as he's holding his hand, like, it's so scary. And it wakes you up in a way to like what the movie is actually going to be about. And he just keeps you on your toes, unlike any other director.
And I mean, in 94, when I saw Pulp Fiction, the structure seemed revolutionary to me. I'd never seen anything like it. The way Tarantino uses the nonlinear storytelling to make his movies, and don't get me wrong, he didn't invent this. This wasn't something new. You'd had Annie Hall or Citizen Kane, but those weren't the movies that I was watching in 94. And when Tarantino uses that in his mainstream films, it just blew my mind. Ash, you talk about that scene. We go from a conversation in the diner to boom, Mr. Orange is shot in the backseat of the car. And you're immediately thinking, where are we? How did we get here? What the hell's going on? And you're just thrown onto this roller coaster mid-ride.
And I remember from college, people giving you that bullshit at the coffee shop or at the bar, like, well, actually, if you've seen Rashomon, or like, actually, during Citizen Kane, as you mentioned, Big D. No, fuck you, I didn't. And that's the thing. I'm a 14-year-old kid. I'm a 12-year-old kid. It's the 1990s. he did it better. And he did it in a way that kids in the mainstream could ingest this stuff. Like, it was just a different way of doing it. Everything is derivative at this point. That's not the argument, right? The argument is like, who did it best? And, you know, it reminds me of like burger places, right? Yeah, fucking McDonald's and Burger King been around forever. But when Smash Burger hit the scene, when fucking Five Guys hit the scene, it changed the game. It was like, oh, this is what a burger's supposed to taste like. That's what he did for film.
Well, and it's crazy when he did it, because this movie, as you've already kind of alluded to, Gene, is so ahead of its time. And it's really hard for me to orient Tarantino around any time period, because he feels like just always out of time. Because he feels so classic. I have to be honest, I did not remember that this movie came out in 92. This movie doesn't look like it came out in 92. Even watching it in 2022, it doesn't feel that way. Tarantino was so advanced in the style of filmmaking that he did. And here's the deal. He completely changed movies. He changed how movies would look, how they would feel, and most importantly, he changed the way that they sounded. Because the dialogue in this movie, there's something really, really crisp about it. And it's like the world and like movies before it were like a nice Fuji apple, right? It's sweet, it's comforting, it's good for you. We all know what it tastes like. And then Tarantino comes on like a fucking Granny Smith apple. He's crisp, he's refreshing, he's kind of sour, he wakes you up. And it's evident from the get-go here. And I think that what's really fascinating is that you say things are derivative, right? So much was derivative of this film. He defined a crime genre, maybe really even through to today, what crime movies look like. But this movie, even though he started all that, still feels really revolutionary in 22, and it still feels different than everything that came after it that tried to be it and just failed.
I was trying to find the right words, Ash, and you nailed them right there, is creating a genre. Because in 1992, the movies weren't bad. I mean, you had like Wayne's World, you had Basic Instinct, you had White Man Can't Jump. Like, those are all good movies. They're entertaining movies. But they were doing a thing that we had seen before and just a different little twist on it. This was something new to us. This was something that really changed the way we saw that crime genre. And it is not just a crime movie. It's something more than that. It's a Tarantino crime movie. Well, the gangsters carry out a diamond heist. White flees with Orange, who was shot during the escape. At one of Joe's warehouses, White and Orange rendezvous with Pink, who believes that the job was a setup. White informs him that Brown is dead, Blue and Blonde are missing, and Blonde murdered several civilians during the heist. White is furious that Joe would employ Blonde, whom he describes as a psychopath. Pink has hidden the diamonds nearby. He argues with White over whether to get medical attention for Orange, and the pair draw guns at each other. They stand down when Blonde arrives with the kidnapped policeman named Marvin Nash.
I want to remind everybody, because I know it sounds like we're just like jerking off this film and just like loving all over it. But like, I want to remind everyone that this is Tarantino's film debut. Like, this is his first feature length film that he has directed. And it doesn't feel like a first film. This feels like a seasoned director. It feels like somebody who's been directing for years. Even just the way he sets scenes. There's this frenetic buildup that happens between Mr. Pink and between Mr. White. And the way that it gets there is not through fighting. They're not shooting at each other. They're not fighting one another with their fists. They're fighting one another with words. And the dialogue and the acting and the way that he sets that scene where Buscemi's on one side and White's on the other side, like, it just makes you so tense. It's like a masterclass on how to set a scene. And I don't know if there's a better debut of a director ever. Like, the only ones that I could come up that are anywhere near it is like Steven Soderbergh with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which was amazing, or Spike Lee with She Gotta Have It, which again, absolutely amazing. Other than those two and Tarantino, I think that's got to be it. And y'all, Hollywood, like the directors that were like the directors at this time, they must have shit their pants when they saw this film. They must have been like, what the fuck? Who is this weird ass dude that used to work at a Blockbuster and lived in New Orleans? Like, where the fuck did this guy come from?
Most movies are lucky to have one iconic scene, like Harrison Ford jumping in The Fugitive or Neo dodging the bullets in The Matrix. That's not to be confused with memorable scenes or cool scenes or quality scenes, but iconic scenes that you see an outline of it. You see a decal on the back of somebody's car and you know exactly what that scene is. Reservoir Dogs is loaded with them. Again, for a guy's directorial debut. I mean, think about how many t-shirts, decals, tattoo designs came from this one low budget debut film. You see the standoff with the guns drawn between pink and white. You know exactly that moment of the movie. You know exactly what Tarantino is all about. And it's there all over the place in pop culture. And mentioned the cast of this movie in the introduction, but it really needs some serious attention because these are some heavy hitters. Again, for a guy's debut film, Quentin Tarantino has a stable of actors that he loves to use in his movies over and over again. And Tim Roth might be his favorite. These guys have teamed up for Pulp Fiction. They did The Hateful Eight. They did Four Rooms. And of course, Reservoir Dogs. And I have zero complaints about Tim Roth's acting. Particularly when he's playing like an English character like Ted the Bellhop. Ted the Bellhop is fantastic. If you haven't seen Four Rooms, definitely check it out. But Tim Roth's attempt at an American accent in Reservoir Dogs, combined with his vocalizing his agony of being shot in the belly, it made him sound like a crackhead Muppet in this movie. And the King Bee and I, for years since we were teenagers, whenever we injure ourselves or we're going to attempt something really dangerous, we'll like yell out to each other, "I'm fucking dying here," or "I'm a tough guy." Like, it's so hard to understand what the fuck he's even saying. And I'm an Anglophile saying that.
No way. He's so good in this. And I love how like crazy his voice gets. I love how in pain he is. I think this is one of the most accurate like portrayals of a guy who's dying of a gut wound and is terrified to die in the back seat. And you've got Harvey Keitel yelling at him, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." Like, it's really sad. It's really heartbreaking. And I remember Roth and Madsen the most when I think about this movie. And we'll get to Michael Madsen in a second. And it's because of how affecting both are in totally different ways. And when I think of Reservoir Dogs, I think about a scene with Madsen, and I think about not just Tim Roth, but like his eyes. Like, they do something with the makeup and they do something with his eyes that you can see him slowly bleeding to death throughout this movie. And he is so good in every part of this film, even Muppet voice.
Oh, yeah. I can hear it now, Gene, the Muppet voice, but I have to agree with Ash. I thought that Tarantino, he films chaos and confusion in a way that makes it clear and you can kind of relate. Mr. White attempting to calm down Mr. Orange. He's telling him, "Okay, are you a doctor? No, okay, so then you don't know what you're talking about." He's trying to help his friend. And just think about that voice. You know, what would an undercover cop do who's bleeding to death in the backseat of a car? He's just killed a civilian. He's going to have an identity crisis. He was practicing. It's a role. I can explain why he's having trouble and he's delivering. He's thinking, who am I? What did I do? Who can I trust? What can I tell Larry? How can I survive this?
Blah, 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 blah. Neither of you has addressed the accent issue. What the fuck is that accent?
But I don't think it's an accent issue. I think he's like, have you never been like afraid and your voice goes like up an octave and sounds really strange?
Somebody call the police.
Wait, hold on. He's in scenes other than the scene where he got shot. What about his accent then?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said, "I was losing it. I've gotten it back now," when he calms down. You know, maybe
what about when he's in the diner talking with the other cop?
Maybe the other cop,
or his acting coach, or whatever the fuck that guy
maybe
was.
His acting coach had him doing other work, some vocal work, and this was him kind of reverting back to his bass voice. But we've talked about how low the budget was. It was $1.2 million.
It's crazy.
Watching this film, it's ridiculous. And he did a lot, I think, smart tricks with the low budget. In television, they have what's called a bottle episode, where you have to, whether it's the budget, you have to reduce the scope, few members of the cast, no effects, keep it to one set. Breaking Bad fans, you'll remember The Fly. The Fly episode where Walter and Jesse are chasing around the fly in the lab. That was done simply because Breaking Bad didn't have the budget to shoot one of the exterior episodes, so they had to wait. Tarantino has us in that warehouse for about 85% of the movie. That one warehouse. And not once do you realize, hey, shit, we've been sitting here this whole damn movie. Because the performances, because the material, it's all distracting. You don't notice they're in this one room.
Yeah, he's not just pulling from film, he's pulling from stagecraft. In the first flashback of the robbery, one of the few scenes that we get that's not at the warehouse, we see Mr. Pink running from the cops, he's shooting a few of them, but we never see the heist itself. And in independent film class, we focused a lot on budgeting and how Tarantino and guys like Robert Rodriguez use their budgets differently, right? Robert Rodriguez, he loved to show the shootout. He wanted to show the action scenes, but he didn't have the money for that. So what he did was he went cheap on the guns, like he would use water guns. The amount of shots you actually see being fired, anytime somebody fired a blank, he would shoot it with like 4 different cameras so they could reuse that angle in different shootouts. And then he would just not show the gun firing and he would dub over gunshot sounds and then have actors just throwing shells on the ground to make it look like a gun was firing a bunch. That was his solution. Tarantino was like, fuck it, I'm just going to skip the scene altogether. And he instead leaned on his actors to tell the story. And I got to say, even though we didn't see this heist, I quote unquote remember the details of the Reservoir Dogs robbery way better than I do film robbery scenes that I've actually seen.
Yeah, because he tells you about it rather than shows you. So you're forced to like imagine it in your mind. And when it's described, it's so much better. And I love how through this nonlinear way, like he gives you like piece by piece by piece. So you see it from every single different angle. And it's worse because you play it out in your mind. It's more violent because you play it out in your mind. And I know that this movie got pegged for being super, super violent, but on rewatch, it really isn't. Like, there's the one famous scene with Michael Madsen that is super violent. You got a guy bleeding to death. But other than that, in the end, like a lot of the violence, quote unquote, like is talked about. A lot of it is described rather than shown on screen. And I think that's really fascinating because he would go on. We all know what Tarantino eventually would do with violence. We know how like out there eventually he would get. Kill Bill being kind of like the peak of that for him, which I love, but that's where he's showing you rather than telling you. And here, like, this is tame compared to what he would do one day.
There's a lot of guerrilla filmmaking feel to what he's doing. I questioned on half the shoots, did he have a permit to film there? Because there's a scene where you get Mr. Brown crashes the car, then I think it's Mr. White and Mr. Orange come out, and the 2 cops and Harvey Keitel shoots up the police car. If you look about 15 feet in the background, there's 2 different groups of like 5 or 6 people hanging out, watching them. Must have been like, what the fuck are these clowns doing? Because they probably didn't have, like you said, Gene, the gunshot effects. They were probably just running around, and people around there thought, what is this, a student film? What are these guys doing? Because if they heard a police cruiser shot up in LA like that, those dudes would have been running.
I'm so glad you noticed that because I thought it was the only one. I was like, are those guys supposed to be there? It's just like it looked like a Chevelle or something and like a group of dudes just standing around it.
Hanging out, yep.
It just adds to the quality.
Totally.
White and Pink beat Nash for information. Eddie arrives and orders them to retrieve the diamonds and ditch the getaway vehicles, leaving Blonde in charge of Nash and Orange. Blonde cuts off Nash's ear with a straight razor. He prepares to set him on fire, but Orange shoots Blonde dead. Orange reveals to Nash that he is an undercover police officer and that the police will arrive soon.
So I think one of Tarantino's calling cards and one of his most recognizable trademarks is his soundtracks. I remember buying Pulp Fiction. I remember buying this. And what he did was he picked non-traditional songs. Instead of finding big artists or going out there and finding the big hit of the day, like we make fun of films and say, okay, you're trying to force Forrest Gump. You're trying to force us to feel sentimentality and to reminisce about the time. Instead, he would go out and he would find these rare offbeat, like retro songs that once you heard them, you're like, shit, I know that from somewhere. And then he pairs it with a scene that doesn't match it. And the big one in this is where you get Mr. Blonde is going to go ass crazy on the cop, and they play that folk rock Steeler Wheels Stuck in the Middle, and it is just catchy. You just hear it, and he's dancing around slowly, he's circling the cop. And then what he does is he walks out to the car, he's going to get some gas, and the music fades. And all of a sudden, you realize the music is in-world. They're listening to the radio station in the garage. He gets the gas can, walks back in, the radio increases, and they do this a couple times. They're in one of the cars, and again, the music follows them. and it becomes so organic. It's not a soundtrack. It's more the music of the movie.
I totally forgot to mention K. Billy's super sounds of the 70s. Fucking Stephen Wright doing the radio announcer voice. I'm such a nerd that if someone were to sit next to me while I'm watching this movie, I cannot resist but say the words along with it. You know, like the monster truck extravaganza with Behemoth. It's so good. The soundtrack is so incredible.
Well, in this torture scene, I mean, obviously one of the most famous parts of this movie, and it's just so good. Mr. Blonde, Michael Madsen, he's terrifying in this scene because he's so completely unhinged. The music is perfect. To this day, and I don't think any Reservoir Dogs fan is different. Like, as soon as I hear this song, like if it comes on the radio, if it comes on like in a store, like immediately, like I want to start like randomly like doing that weird little walk that Michael Madsen does. And you've got Orange here in a literal pool of blood. He's white as a sheet. You think he's probably dead because he hasn't moved like in forever. And then all of a sudden he kills Michael Madsen. And this again is another Tarantino moment where right when you think like you're in the world, you've settled in the world, you know what it is, it completely flips again. And it's just a good reveal. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there are famously like little hints all throughout the movie that Orange is the rat, including in that really famous scene between White and Pink. You've got in the background like all these bottles that are grouped and the colors of the guys that aren't the rats, and then orange bottles grouped on the other side. Like there are these very small little hints that Tarantino leaves, which when I watched this for the first time at like 14, I didn't catch any of that. And I remember being completely shocked when we find out that Orange is the rat, and it works perfect. And then you have him yelling like, "I'm fucking dying here!" Like knowing that his saving grace is like right outside that door, and the mind fuck that must be for him to know that they could come in like at any minute to save him. I love this part of this movie.
Yeah, there are hints throughout the movie about Orange being the rat. One of them that people like to cite, which is actually not a hint that Orange is the rat, is the orange balloon. So when Nice Guy Eddie is driving the car, there's an orange balloon that's kind of caught in the draft of the car. Tarantino says that was just a mistake or like it's an accident, but I don't know. I like to think. Now I feel bad for ruining the illusion, baby. But back to Tarantino. Tarantino is known for a lot of things. We've mentioned the violence, the profanity, the slick dialogue, the soundtracks. I'd like to add to the list Master of Torture, because this movie got me to think about how many amazing torture scenes Quentin Tarantino has done, from Pulp Fiction to Kill Bill to Reservoir Dogs, Django Unchained. Like, this guy just knows how to film these incredibly uncomfortable torture scenes without losing the entertainment factor. You don't want to watch, but you do watch at the same time. And he's incredible at pulling off that trick. I recently had another set of blow-ups at work that caused my supervisor to now assign me anger management and communication classes.
Oh, Jesus.
And in that same week, I'm watching Reservoir Dogs, and I'm so jealous of Mr. Blonde. As you said, Ash, Michael Madsen, he is perfect in this role. He speaks softly, but with absolute conviction and his own brand of logic. To him, the crazy shit he's saying makes sense. I told them not to trigger the alarm. They did, so I had to kill them all. And it really reveals that the least intimidating person in the room, that's the person who's losing their shit and being loud. He makes Mr. White, who is the most moral and level-headed character in this warehouse, seem like the loose cannon, because he's screaming about how Mr. Blonde is a psychopath when really Mr. Blonde is playing it cooler than anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason why my children are the most afraid of me when I'm quiet, right? Like, there's something about quiet crazy or quiet anger that's so disturbing. And Michael Madsen, absolute best. The way that he like kind of whispers his lines. And he's so intimidating because he genuinely could give a fuck about any of them, about himself, about anything. And so you get this like reveal of him, because up until this point, you've got Orange on the ground, you know, muppeting his voice and screaming in a pile of blood. You've got White, who's losing his shit because he wants to save Orange life. You got Steve Buscemi, who's being Steve Buscemi, which is just like a ball of like raw nerves. That's how he performs every role, and I love it. And then they pan over, and you've got Madsen, who is so tall and he's so young and like lean in this movie. And he's leaned up against a pole with a drink from like a 7-Eleven. And he's just drinking it, watching them. And he looks badass and he delivers these lines like, are you going to bark all day, little doggy? Or are you going to bite? It's just so good. It's so good, that juxtaposition of him to the crazy. And I don't know if Michael Madsen ever has been in anything other than Tarantino films that pay an homage to how good of an actor he is. But there's something about Tarantino that just gets the best out of him.
Yeah, but like you said, that control, that's the scariest version of crazy. Earlier on the film, you had Joe Cabot and Nice Guy Eddie. I could never tell whether or not Mr. Blonde was serious or whether he was going to flip the switch and become violent. I felt uneasy, even in a scene where it was two friends. You know, they were playing around with each other and wrestling. I was waiting for him at any moment to flip that switch. That's how crazy he is. And it carries throughout. It's a wonderful performance.
When Eddie, Pink, and White return, Orange tries to convince them that Blonde planned to kill them all and steal the diamonds for himself. Eddie kills Nash and accuses Orange of lying. Joe arrives with news that the police have killed Blue. He is about to execute Orange, whom he suspects is the traitor behind the setup. But White intervenes and holds Joe at gunpoint, insisting that Orange is not an undercover cop. Eddie aims at White, creating a standoff. All three fire, both Cabots are killed, and White and Orange are hit.
Okay, so I have to interrupt this circle jerk as we're all slurping on Quentin and ask a couple questions here. Yes, he's a talented filmmaker, but watching this, his directorial debut, you can see Tarantino's style, his go-to moves, his biggest hits. We've talked about the soundtracks. Then also you have to have a scene where the criminals are planning in a diner. You get a bonus point, even if it's Tim Roth. Someone's got to get shot in the backseat of a car. There's got to be blood all over the back of a car. You have to have a character telling the other one to stay cool. Are we cool? You got to have somebody with a POV shot from underneath in the back of a trunk up at guys with guns. I know he's talented, but can we say after all of his films that there is a recipe that he might be a one-trick pony and less than original or capable to do something outside of a, quote, Tarantino film?
I mean, have you seen anything he did after Pulp Fiction? Because, like, he does a lot of this stuff, but like his movies have completely changed. Like there was this really interesting article that was written about what will Tarantino be known for? Will it be Reservoir Dogs or will it be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? And it was talking about how different Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is from anything else he's done. I mean, Django Unchained is so different than anything else he's done. The only thing that I think is like a huge line is that violence that he keeps and like that like obscene violence to prove a point. But y'all, like, I mean, he's fucking brilliant.
I guess this is the part where we should bring up the Tarantino tendency to have white characters speaking in intensely racist terms about black people. That seems to be sticking around just fine. And I won't repeat all the terms used, but you guys know what I'm talking about. I recently learned that there was, however, a dramatic reading of Reservoir Dogs where black actors read all the white parts. And the thing they discovered during that project is that it actually makes more sense when Mr. Pink, Mr. White, Mr. Blue, Mr. Brown are black actors. All these guys are talking like they're black, which was an epiphany for me. These are black characters being played by white people.
Yeah, and I think that that's really, really fascinating. And I think it would be interesting to have him talk about what commentary he's making with that. But I just also want to say something else, right, about like repetitiveness. I am a huge Wes Anderson fan. I think Wes Anderson is fucking amazing. But I also understand that Wes Anderson is a one-trick pony. All of Wes Anderson's films feel very, very, very similar. It's a very particular world he's created and all of that. But you have got, you know, movies. I mean, just Inglourious Bastards, the opening of Inglourious Bastards, like he used none of his tricks and the parts of those movies that work best.
Well, this might be the point where I do admit I have not seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or Django Unchained.
So get the fuck out of here.
I have not. Last thing I saw was The Hateful Eight. I told you, the man kind of turned me off, but I will he watch
turned you
those
off in 2003?
No, I said that's where it started.
The interview in 2003?
Yes, it made me dislike him.
Okay.
I just see his face. I don't like him. So I will go back and watch those. Okay. After it was, when the whole guitar smashing also bothered me, but whatever, that's a different story. In Hateful Eight, I just never watched them. But I do want to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I will watch that soon and report back.
I'm just trying to imagine Big D going to like a Tori Amos concert and be like, oh, is she going to fucking play that piano again? Or like Nine Inch Nails, like, let me guess, is he going to sample something and then make it sound like a machine? Or like, we're going to go to like a Prince concert if he was still alive. Be like, oh, is he going to just play his guitar and dance around all night? Yeah, it's what he does, but he's really good at it. And it's entertaining. Mm-hmm. My point is Reservoir Dogs is flawless, fucking flawless up until Mr. Orange's flashback scene. So some of these characters get flashbacks where we find out their history, that nonlinear storytelling that we get in this film. And you can see in these flashbacks how much Tarantino has grown as a director, because now his flashbacks always have a terrific payoff. When he does a movie now and you have a vignette, it's tightly edited. It has a point. It connects to the rest of the movie and it keeps the energy going. But this Mr. Orange disaster of a vignette, it takes us to Mr. Orange as an undercover cop learning how to act by telling a story about running into a drug dog in a bathroom while carrying a bag of weed. It goes through multiple sets. It introduces a character we never see again. I still don't know if that's another cop or an acting teacher. Is he like Gene Cousineau or what the fuck is going on there? Carl Weathers. We waste a good 10 minutes of film and it slows the whole production down. Cut this shit out.
Yeah, I mean, you've got this insanely dramatic scene. It makes your heart race. And then there's this. It feels like a shift in pace, which I like that he does, but maybe like in the wrong direction.
Yes.
Although I do think Roth plays it perfectly. And what I wish they had done is like leave that shit out, but still do the part where we get this reveal that he killed an innocent person. I don't think we need to see any of the stuff of him preparing to be undercover. I think we just need to go to that, just cut to that part where he and White are walking away and you realize, oh shit, he didn't get shot during the robbery. He got shot after the fact, and that reveal. And I think then like chef's kiss, it's perfect.
I don't know. I kind of liked it. I thought the payoff was subtle. I think it takes a special kind of crazy to become an undercover cop, and watching him go through those steps with his handler, I thought it was something that we needed to see, because to get him into this crew on one single voucher from the guy down at the docks, we would have called bullshit on that. But when you mix in these flashbacks, you see him prepping, you see what went into the operation. I think it pays off in that huge, where they're throwing rapid fire questions at him. If he didn't practice to become the role, to be able to answer it, I think we would have called bullshit on it. And that scene in the bathroom, yes, it's over the top, it's dramatic, it's hyper stylized, but that is the retelling of a drug dealer's story. I think it pays off. And it also helps me realize Pink was right in telling Mr. White, you can't go to the hospital because you've compromised yourself. Those pieces of information, your name and Wisconsin, that was enough to get us caught. And the payoff is that the cops have already put those pieces together.
Yeah, but the scene where he's, getting his street cred by telling this story to Joe Cabot, I'm like, there's no fucking way. These guys, these gangsters are going to be like, we don't fucking care. This is a stupid story. You're wasting our fucking time here. It's not entertaining. And then Tim Roth, I'm sorry, with like, the multiples, we're on top of a building. We're like in some like graffiti laden alleyway. It's just, come on. This is some 21 Jump Street rinky-dink. Well, Pink, the only uninjured person, takes the diamonds and flees. As White cradles the dying Orange in his arms, Orange confesses that he is an undercover officer. White presses the gun to Orange's head. The police storm the warehouse and order White to drop his gun. Gunshot sound, and White collapses. So I want to start out by saying the notion of cops waiting outside a warehouse where you have 1, a kidnapped cop, 2, a wounded undercover officer, and 3, fucking gunshots going off. That is totally far-fetched. The cops would be in there in a heartbeat. But it really does set up a powerfully tragic ending to the film. So I'll let it lie. We care about Mr. Orange. I think we care even more about Mr. White, who risked his own life and shot his boss because he had faith in a stranger. He is the most compelling tale in this assortment of tales. And hearing Harvey Keitel, I mean, you want to talk about Tim Roth being good at being in pain. Harvey Keitel is the king of the moan since like Bad Lieutenant. When he goes like he's the best at that. Watching him fall apart, watching him kill the man he was trying to protect, it brings an unexpected sadness to the film, something I wasn't expecting to get out of a Tarantino film. And it shows that Tarantino isn't just slick chatter and groovy soundtracks. He's a competent filmmaker in so many more dimensions.
Yeah, I think that what really works here is that Tarantino lets them have their moment. It isn't just a quick thing, because it would have ruined it if the cops would have like run in. He lets Keitel, he lets Roth like kind of drag this out. And by doing so, he lets this grief like fall all over Harvey Keitel. We can see him regret. We can see him be angry. We can see him be sad. We can see him resign himself that he's gonna die. And he lets Orange basically know that he's going to die. And they both die together. And it's so sad. But I don't know if this movie could have ended any other way. Like, how else do you end this film other than like this mega tragedy?
Yeah, if this was the typical early 90s, late 80s movie, there's an ambulance outside. Some guy's got a blanket on him. He's like, giving him like a cup of coffee or something.
He's in that aluminum foil blanket. You know,
yes,
they got it all tucked in around him.
Uh-huh. And then
his
they play
wife
like
is there holding his hand.
Yeah, some Brian De Palma soundtrack, like with hand percussion. And then the camera pans out on Greater LA. That's how the movie normally ends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it just works. And Harvey Keitel, I love him. I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Piano, the movie where Holly Hunter is mute and she basically has to do sexual favors for Harvey Keitel for one piano key at a time. And it's very dark, but like this really beautiful love story. And like, he's so good in that movie. And like what you're talking about, the king of the moan, right? Like he has so much grief in that movie. He's just so good at like making his body look just like downtrodden and like beaten by the world.
I love the fact that Gene Lyons all of a sudden has become the champion of the police officers. They would be in there in a second. Gene, you hear about that little shooting in Texas? The cops don't always run in.
Oh, buddy. No, there's two of their own in there. That's a whole different story. Listen.
Well, what I'm saying is they're not always the most tactical.
Bro, it's a stakeout of this warehouse. What are they fucking waiting for?
But I actually also think it's fairly realistic, because if you go and you count, it's less than a minute and a half. And so they're not going to be like right outside. They had to be hidden so that they didn't see them. I could see it taking a minute and a half for them to get in there.
Maybe 45 minutes. They got to get hand sanitizer. You don't know what's going to happen. They might take their time. I'm just saying, listen.
Fucking based Big D over here.
I'm just saying.
I like what I'm hearing.
That people aren't always the most tactically proficient. Sadly, in the military, I learned that just because you wear a uniform doesn't mean you're the most proficient or tactically adept.
Tactically proficient? Big D, if you're in your military unit, right? You're there with your fellow airborne guys, and you see one of the guys get pulled out of a fucking trunk and taken into a place, and then a guy comes back out and gets a can of gas. And oh, by the way, the guy is Michael Madsen. You're going in immediately.
I agree, but there is something called a chain of command, and sometimes leadership wants the big fish. They want Joe Cabot, and you would go in there and maybe just screw it up. I don't know. I could see them being held back by leadership. I see that as potential. But as we get towards the end here, I just want to close up something I mentioned earlier, that a lot of Tarantino's films are similar. And his fans have taken this to the nth degree. They've put together this basic like Marvel cinematic universe to where they've tried to take every single one of his movies and tie them together. Do you buy into it, or do you feel like this just diminishes the work of Tarantino?
Whether or not this is a real thing, I do think it diminishes the work. I don't understand why people have to ruin perfectly good movies and TV shows with meta shit like this. Like, this is a good movie. Pulp Fiction is a good movie. Whether or not they exist in some universe, who gives a flying fuck? If they didn't make an attempt to actually tell us that, if there's no story continuity there, that one impacts the other, then No, just leave it the fuck alone. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, yes, it's intentional connections that give you background for certain things and certain relationships. That is not the case here. So whether they incidentally are in the same universe, who cares? But, King B says it a lot of times. Go watch something else. Go do something else. You don't need to fucking ponder this.
Agreed.
Well, now is the time during the podcast where we give our Shat score. The Shat score is our way of telling you how many wipes this movie would take to get our respective butts. 0 wipes is a perfect movie. It is being 18 years old and wearing your first skinny black tie and suit to a ska show where all the other kids just saw Reservoir Dogs for the first time, and you're all so eager to quote it together. 5 wipes is an absolute disaster of a film. It is being shot in the belly and bleeding to death while some rookie cop complains about something as trivial as losing an ear and being doused in gasoline. Big D, we'll start with you. What is your wipe score for Reservoir Dogs?
So in trying to come up with a score for this, I asked myself one simple question. How could the movie have been improved? And I don't see a single glaring flaw. I think the limited budget aided them in some of their shoot choices and some of the direction they took the film. The performances are wonderful. The story moves. I think it's memorable. There is nothing in this movie that stands out to me as something that is a clear deficiency. So for that, I have to give it a perfect score. I think it is a 0 wipe movie. I could watch this again immediately. And this was a true joy to watch. So thank you very much, Jody.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's iconic. It gave us the genius of Tarantino for the first time. It, as I've already said, gave us the script for what crime movies would look like moving forward, because all of them would all of a sudden have this quirky criminal that has frenetic dialogue and he kind of talks too much whenever he's scared. And this movie's beyond important. It's so fucking good. But I can't say it's perfect. It's damn near close, though. I agree with Gene. I think that Tarantino's editing wasn't quite there at the end, but that's it. Otherwise, it's perfection. But my issue is I look at Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is a rare film. Pulp Fiction is a perfect film from opening frame to the end of the credits. There is nothing about that film that I would change. And while this is masterful, it's not Pulp Fiction. So for me, I'm going to go almost 0 wipes. I'm going to say 0.25. Phenomenal film, just not Pulp Fiction.
I'm with you on the Pulp Fiction thing, Ash. Pulp Fiction is one of the few Shat movies I awarded 0 wipes. And that sets the standard for all movies, and in particular, Tarantino movies. I want to be clear before I deliver my wipe score that I love Reservoir Dogs. I love the characters, the scenes, the dialogue, the standoffs. All of them are iconic. But Tarantino hadn't perfected his editing at this point, and he needed just a little more time, a little more experience, perhaps even a little more budget to get it all right. You cut the commode story and you're closer to half a wipe, but with the many ticky-tacky flaws throughout this film that just sour it slightly, this is one solid, satisfying wipe. So 1 wipe from me, a quarter wipe from Ash, and 0 wipes from Big D. That gives us an average wipe score of 0.416 repeating wipes for Reservoir Dogs.
So Gene, with a score of 0.41 repeating wipes, that now ties this in the 15 spot with some heavy hitters: Silence of the Lambs, Predator, and Jacob's Ladder. Slightly better than Forrest Gump, The Shining, and Aliens, and slightly worse than The Cable Guy, Saving Private Ryan, and The Big Lebowski.
Well, now hold on. What did I give Jacob's Ladder?
Jacob's Ladder, you gave a 0.25.
You're kidding.
Not kidding at all.
Oof. All right. I'd like to amend my score.
Too late.
All right. Well, the books are closed on Reservoir Dogs. So let's move on to the mailbag portion of the podcast before we close out. We've got 2 emails this week, one from Chris and one from Justin.
Well, first up, we got one from Chris, and he writes in and says, "Hi there. I absolutely love this movie and the novel that spawned it. And oddly, should I say what the movie is?"
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Well, up first, we got one from Chris about our Christine podcast. And he says, "Hi there. I absolutely love the movie Christine and the novel that spawned it. And oddly enough, the movie is from the same year I was born. This was the first adult horror novel I read. However, I was about 10 or so at the time. I definitely enjoyed hearing your review and thoughts about the movie, including the references to the book. One of the things that you all brought up was the origin of Christine's evil. In the movie, it's definitely left unclear, but in the novel, I had the following take. Her original owner, Roland, was obsessed with her. It is revealed that his daughter chokes to death on a piece of hamburger at a roadside stand, and when it becomes clear she's going to die, he places her back inside the car to die. His wife becomes extremely depressed and kills herself and Christine shortly afterwards, as he refuses to give the car up. It leaves him estranged from his family, and she is sold by his brother after Roland's death. While it's not directly stated, I think the deaths involved are what imbued this car with a dark power, perhaps using his family as a type of sacrifice. For me, the odd part about Christine's behavior and possession is the split between a jealous girlfriend and also a vengeful killer. As it is presented in the book that the spirit of Roland is behind the wheel when she's murdering those that have crossed her path. I know your focus is in the movies, but I wanted to share my thoughts and maybe cast a different light on what was missing from the film. Thanks for what you do, Chris.
So, Chris, thank you so much for writing in on this, giving us some background. I still stick by my stance that I'd rather not know what it is that makes Christine, like where that evil comes from. I like the idea that the car is just evil. But Ash, I know you wanted kind of more of a background or needed some sort of explanation as to why. So I'm interested in your take on it.
Yeah, I just think that in a movie like that, because it's about a car that kills people, that I guess I just need some reasons. And I think you're spot on, Chris, taking that away from the book, but we don't really get any of that in the film. And I think the film would have been better with just a little bit of a backstory. All right. And then finally tonight, we have an email from Justin, which is talking about a commission. And guys, this is another one who's asking us to break our own rules. And he says, hey guys, I would like to commission a film. After looking it up though, it's the year 2000 and it is the movie Not Another Teen Movie. I know this is a terrible parody, but it was a great bad movie. But I'm not sure if it's too new. Let me know. Are you all interested? And that comes from Justin.
I told Gene that in the summer of 2002 that my unit deployed to West Point and we were training the cadets over the summer. And this was one of 2 DVDs that I had with me. And we watched this thing probably 100 times. It is hilarious. But I don't know. My feeling on it is that we have to expand into 2000 at some point. But I don't know if it would be for this movie. But it's a good one.
We have to expand into the 2000s if we're going all the way back into the 1970s. I think it just makes sense. And so I say we go up to 2005 so someone can commission Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
I mean, listen, we make the rules, right? So it's I think we don't have to expand to 2005 and we can also do Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind because you like it a lot.
I'm going to just commission it for us, for all of us.
Yeah, it's not like we're going to Judgment City where they're going to fucking tell us what movies we can cover.
It's like I'm dying to do American Psycho. And even that one came out right at the edge. There's so many good films. I think, Gene, you're probably right. Don't open the floodgates completely, but if it's a special movie, I don't know if this one is that.
Do it. I mean, I would never describe this movie as hilarious, but I am definitely
it's so funny. It's so funny.
I mean, I'm definitely all for it.
Here's what I would suggest, right? Is that we have special occasions, right? Special occasions warrant special considerations. So sometimes things might be a Twitch stream. Sometimes things might be a bonus podcast release. I don't think in our regular cycle, we would release a movie from 2000 or 2005, but as a special release, as a bonus episode, as a Twitch stream, something like that, I think we can make it happen.
Yeah, I think so. Let's this is a gateway movie into 2000s. Let's open up the gateway. If you'd like to commission it, please contact us. We'll do it as a special cast, and then we'll take it from there. This is our first hit. Let's see where it goes.
Start commissioning early 2000s films, guys. I'm the young one on the pod. These are good movies. And do Eternal Sunshine.
All right. If you would like to commission a movie, you can always write us, host at shatthemovies.com, or leave us a voicemail at shatpod.com using the SpeakPipe feature. Big D, what do we have coming up next week?
Gene, John Murdoch awakens alone in a strange hotel to find that he is wanted for a series of brutal murders. The problem is that he can't remember whether he committed the murders or not. For one brief moment, he is convinced that he has gone completely mad. Murdoch seems to unravel the twisted riddles of his identity as he edges closer to solving the mystery. He stumbles upon a fiendish underworld controlled by a group of ominous beings, collectively known as the Strangers. Commissioned by Ryan C., came out in 1998. And this will be a new one for me.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for your upcoming commission. And thank you, Jody, for the last 2 movies. We've really enjoyed reviewing them for you. Thank you to all the commissioners who make this podcast possible. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media, share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. You can email us, host@shatthemovies.com, or leave us a voicemail at shatpod.com using the SpeakPipe feature. You can support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, buying our merch, or commissioning your own movie. Find all the information by visiting our website, shatpod.com. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV. We review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Find all the information on our website, shatpod.com/TV. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. If you stop by Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-hosts, Ash, Big D, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Join us next week for the following movie.
First, there was darkness. Then came the strangers.
They come when we sleep.
Seeking a cure for their own mortality.
To steal our thoughts.
Our souls makes us different from them.
To shape our memories.
We have much to do.
To take away all that makes us human.
It is time.
Who are they? Answer me!
But one of us knows their secret.
You saw something, didn't you?
I don't think the sun even exists.
And one of us...
We are running out of time. There's no escape.
...has the power to stop them.